safer?
How long? What?
How long are we going to be staying in the safer? Because I'm going out of town. I want to know if I should take the safer with me.
It looks to me it can be another month or two. I don't know. We have plenty
Okay,
to go.
Okay, that's good. How long are we going to be staying in the
I
safer?
don't know. It could be a month. It could be more. Of course, take it. Another month or two. I don't know. We have plenty.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was summing up, coming close to the conclusion of summing up, that he's explaining that there's two stages in the process of creation and the building of the world. One is the architect developing a design, all the details, all the intricate details, but it's still on a blueprint, like he called aluach, a tablet. So it's bekitzer v'tamtziz bereishis ba'alma. And then comes the second stage, the bekim b'meleches habinyan, the experts in actually building something. Completely different skill, like he said. He said earlier, you need to have here umnim acherim shebekim betuv hamalocha, malchus habinyan yisadru havonim, that they will actually implement and organize and sadru the materials, the stones and the materials to build. The yivnu haboinim kol prat to prat, and the builders will build every detail. Shezeu chochmeh chadosha v'amuka b'yeser. That's a new wisdom and a deeper amuka and amuka b'yeser, and a very deep one. In addition to the first step of the architectural design. That's where we stopped. This is all coming to explain why Talmidei Chacham are called Beinim. Al tikar b'noyach ela boinoyach. They're called Bein ha'elam, Beinim she'eskim b'binyana shel. When in truth, God created it with the letters of the written Torah. So these are basically explaining what we learned till now about Chochmei Law, Chochmei Tatah, the written Torah and the oral Torah. In this context, who builds the world? And he said, Shnei Emes. Both are true. Well, in the middle of still explaining it, so now we'll continue learning from where we are. The parentheses around the 10 lines from the top of page 414. Mitler Rebbe's Maimer, Maimori Admur Amtsoi, Bereishis, Chochmeh Chadosha V'Amuka B'Yesus is the line. You can find the pages at ayimbeis.com. Okay. So he says like this now. Valderach Dugme is giving an example for these two stages of building something. Valderach Dugme, for example, Valderach Dugme Zu David, Derach Dugme Zu David, Zu the Hovid Hichin L'Shleime, David HaMelech, King David, prepared for Shleime, Kol HaDvorim HaTzrichim L'Binyan Beis HaMikdash. All the necessary items for the building of the Beis HaMikdash, of the first temple. Commissioner Koshev, like the Pasuk says in Tanakh, in the Divrei Yom Asher Hachinesi, that I prepared. David is telling Shlomo Asher Hachinesi, everything I prepared for you to build it. Ach im kol zeh, with all this preparation that David did, nevertheless, ikar chochmas habinyan bepel mamish, the primary wisdom and intelligence in the building of the Beis Hamikdash, bepel mamish, in actuality, hoyalidei Shlomo dafke, was explicitly and specifically through Shlomo. Va'afal pi she'amar hakol b'ksav miyad Hashem alai his skill. The pasuk says that even though it says that everything was written miyad Hashem alai his skill, that God inspired me, or God, you can say, channeled within me, that I should conceive, it was all miyad Hashem. Kol b'ksav miyad Hashem alai his skill, upon me, that David is saying, ukiyadua mavur b'mokim acher. So even though that's the case, yet the actual building was Shlomo HaMelech. So two stages. Now, of course, Shlomo followed the guidelines, just like when the contractors and the builders, they don't build on their own. They're following the blueprint and every detail of the blueprint. So Torah Sheba'al Peh is not its own entity. It's following Torah Shebiksav, but it's a separate stage, as we'll learn. The Mittler Rebbe adds now, as it's known and explained elsewhere, Shal Derech Zehu Sefer Bereishis. In Torah, we have 5 Chumoshim. Sefer Bereishis also serves, relative to the other parts of Torah, this role. Shenikra Sefer HaYoshar. Sefer Bereishis is called Sefer HaYoshar because it's about the Yesharim, the straight ones, which is referring to the patriarchs, the Avis. But he explains in Teres Chaim and in other places, they refer to down below. Different sources that what? Maybe it should say Shebesvarim Acherim, but it says Sdarim Acherim. That Sefer Bereishis is unique, that it covers the story of creation, and it covers the first 2,000 years, whereas Shmois and the other Svarim is where really the mitzvahs begin. Achedesh Hazel Lachem, the first mitzvah. There are a few mitzvahs in Bereishis too, but Sefer Bereishis is explained is like considered to be like the blueprint upon which the rest of the Torah follows. So he says that's what he's saying. That what's the achana? The story of creation, the story of the Oves, everything that prepares the ground, so-called the foundation, called the foundation, upon which the building of the rest of the Torah follows. Like I said, Zdarim Acherim is an interesting expression. Maybe, as I point out, maybe you should say Shebesvarim Acherim. Not sure. They don't correct it, so it says Zdarim. Okay. And now he's going to bring it back to Torah Shebiksav and Torah Sheba'al Peh. V'keinhu, v'kachu, after the parentheses, and so too is it, be'inyan Torah Shebiksav, about the written Torah. She'esi sheba nikra avonim. The letters in the written Torah are called stones. P'chinas avnei kedesh she'elyon canal. The level of the holy supernal stones. In other words, just like stones below are the building blocks of creation, they're rooted in the letters of the Torah. The letters of the Torah are like think of them as spiritual stones, the spiritual building blocks of existence. Shekvar huchnu kaidem shenivraela. These letters precede existence. Kodmalela. They're already prepared before the world was created. This is as God was planning it. Now, of course, as we know, as I point out many times, God did not need all these stages, but he wanted it to make it understandable to us. So he created it in a way, and the world follows. This is the same way we create things. So it was all prepared before Kedim Shenivreim, Kameshakasav Ozra, by Yispera, Techina, Vagam Chakra. We read this already, Pasuk earlier. That's when he saw Vayispera, which means he counted, he measured. Hichina v'gam chakri, prepared, and also chakra, from the word chkira, analyzed and evaluated. B'kav amida, that before creation, God evaluated and measured and allocated all the right resources needed to create existence. B'kav amida, with a measuring rod, with a measuring line. Like we learned the kav amida that measures, the kav that measures. Kumay mi modad b'shalei mayim, like who measures with a measuring rod of water. Now this is like when you measure water, the pasuk, we learned this pasuk as well. It's all about medida, that you're measuring the proper resources necessary for existence. Like we spoke before, like the architectural design that's defining and identifying and all the parameters of the structure. Nikra chachma brura. And this level of chachmei love of Torah Shebiksav is called a crystal clear brura, a crystallized wisdom. Because there everything is exactly precise. Amen umna, like we said before, etzle amen, which is umna, that by the Torah was for him, like a nursling, omen is his work book, so to speak, the Eibishter's workbook, Shazel Kol Tziruf Bereishis, and this consists of the Torah Shebiksav, all the combination of letters, the Torah Shebiksav. The Torah Shebiksav is not just letters, but their combination, each of them, is very precise exactly. Think of it like, Alhamdulillah, call it, the source code of a computer program. So before we're talking about the actual results of the program, a programmer is writing all the details of the program, which in turn will generate, and when triggered, all the results you want. But the program is written before the creation of the object itself, before it's actually implemented. So the Eibishter wrote this program in all the details, all the programming language of existence. It's a very good example for this. Called Shiruf Eisi, the Torah Shebiksav, all the combinations, the proper order and the proper progression and the proper details of all the details. Shabo b'misper mechuven. It all comes in a very precise number, precise measure. Canal. Like in the program, you can't, if you add a letter or you even add a dot or you subtract, it will not work. So in other words, the program has to be written exact, precise. This is all the first step of Torah Shebiksav before creation. This is like the tzir, this is like the artistic rendition, if you wish, or the blueprint. On the luach, on the tablet, or the blueprint of the builders. Their architectural design, their wireframe, their program, with all its details. The whole outline is there, the whole skeleton. How do I say skeleton? Maybe it's not the right word. But it's all there like a luach shalbein levad. Why I mean levad? Because he didn't yet build it's not actually the building of the world, it's laying out all the necessary components. And on this level is what we say, God looked into the Torah and created the world. Shekol AdHamtz Bereishis, because every manner of creation, everything is according to the plan. Everything is according to the plan of the Torah that God had established before the creation. So that means it's talking about Isa. That's why God looks into the Torah and creates based on, like a builder who builds based on the blueprint. V'hainu. And this means that everything that's mentioned in the Torah, all matters of this world, and all the dinim of animals, and of behemoths of I guess domestic animals, v'chaya and animals, v'oif and birds, v'gam b'tzemeach v'demim, and also in the world of vegetation and the world of the mineral world. Meaning, whole like he spoke earlier, demim tzemeach chai, k'moy kesev v'zav and necheshes. Demim includes silver and gold and copper. V'yiriyes. So you have all the halachas about the Mishkan. It was built from silver, gold, copper. V'yiriyes, the walls, the what are they called? The hides that were made from tcheles v'argomen, from different materials. Tcheles, argomon, with bluish material, the purple material. Different opinions what this means, but the Urias were these, what do we call them? Not sheets, tapestries. The Malechas HaMishkan. So all these dinim that you see in Torah that talk about all the items of the world, they talk about objects with which you build the Mishkan. And same thing with before the laws of Karbonis, the dinim of Behema, Chaya, Eif. And in general, everything that the Torah talks about matters of this world. So obviously we look at it, physical matter that we use, gold, silver, copper, to build. But in the Torah, when this was all written in the written Torah by Hashem first, before creation, this becomes the root. Kloli, the Sherish Kloli. The overriding of the general, you can say, the overarching root. For the creation of all the creations. In other words, before there was actual gold, and silver and copper and chelis and argomen and animals and semeach and all the things he just mentioned, it began that first Hashem wrote it all in the Torah. In the Torah, it's a blueprint. It's not yet an existence. It's not yet, we don't have these physical objects yet. It's all essentially like a architect writing it all out in the detailed plan. Shebechola elamis, Ksavos Habarim, of all the creations in all the worlds, Behemoths, V'chayis, the Malachim. He's talking not just animals and chayis down below, but also when we say that some of the angels are compared to behemoths and chayis. Talk about chayis hakedesh, behemoth rabbah, if you recall, on the spiritual level. But they are also creations. Ad semer v'demim de'elam hazeh, all the way down to being demim semer, mineral and vegetable vegetation in this world. In this world, K'moi kimine efes tmeim v'teherim, like the different species. K'moi bimine, yeah, like in the different species of birds, pure, impure, and pure. There are birds like eagles and hawks that are not kosher, they're tmeim, but there are also those that are teherim. Sheniskru b'teira sheviksav, and you find them mentioned in the written Torah in different parshas. We just read in Parsha Shmini a bunch of them as well. Zeu sheirish l'chola efes l'mayla ulamato kahai gavna. So in the Torah, when you read it in the Torah, it's still in the blueprint. That's the root for all the birds above and below. But Pashtus l'mayla lamata, he means, and doesn't just mean above as in the sky. He means l'mayla in ruchnius and lamata in gashmius ukahai gavna. But bottom line, he means all sorts, from top to bottom. So all this, if you read it in Torah, the Torah precedes existence. In other words, if you were there and you were reading the Torah, the world doesn't exist yet, but the blueprint exists, and the blueprint has everything in it, and that will become the root when it says Detailn Bereishis. God will look into his blueprint and then will create the world based on that. However, now comes the second half. That's all Torah shebiksav. Ach, kol ma sheniska b'Torah shebiksav bo b'derech kitzur v'tamtzis. Everything mentioned in the written Torah comes very brief and tamtzis and very concise, very concentrated. That's Torah shebiksav. Aval b'vov sidrei Mishnah. But the 6 dorim, the 6 orders of the Mishnah, like we said, Zman Nokat, Zroya Moyed, Nezikin, Noshim, Kochim Taris, or whatever order you take, those 6 dorim, that's now Torah Shebal Peh. What happens there? The Mishnah, Vov Sidre Mishnah, Nisker Beproti Protis, there it breaks it down to detail, they're very small details. So it takes the general, what is very concentrated, very brief in the written Torah, breaks it down into detail, and all the different species of tzemeach, of vegetation, and daimim, mineral, and chai, and animal, medaber, and human. And now, because now we're talking about the second level of chachma, the chachma of the wisdom of the craftsmen that are actually building, based on the blueprint. So the chachma is ma'isa binyan b'peil mamish, in the actual building and actuality, in a concrete way. Hein b'pnimius, both the inner part of the building. Shein kol hachadorim shebehicholis hachachma detera. That's referring to all the chambers, or all the rooms within the chambers of wisdom of Torah. So in Torah shebiksav, you have it, like I said, in general strokes, broad strokes, like in the blueprint. Now Torah Shebal Peh goes into depth into each one of them, what he's calling now all the rooms in the chambers of Chachma of Torah. That's the premise. V'heim proti hadinim b'chol prat hamidas the Chachma bina b'vov sidrei Mishnah. And that's like the inner, deeper meaning behind it all, the inner, deeper understanding. And also, in all the detailed laws in every detail of the midas of Chachma Bina B'vav Sidrei Mishnah. So here he's being very brief, but if you look at Ayin Beis, when he discusses this, he explains. Because Chachma law is higher than midas. Midas is where it comes down, midah, first of all, from the word measurement in detail, and midas also details that which in the Chachma remains still on an intellectual level. So that's what he means, that Chol Prat HaMidas of Chachma Bina. The Chachma Bina is the root, Torah Shebiksav, Torah Shebal Peh, but then it comes into the midas, the 6 midas correspond to the 6 darim. Again, he's being very brief here, and Ayin Beis elaborates on this. And I could show you later inside, but I'm just saying it right now to understand this line. So now it's coming into the midas, 6 midas, Chachma Bina, B'vav Sidarim Mishnah, B'vav Sidrei Mishnah, kosher apostle. So in Torah Shebiksav, it'll tell you in general what is kosher and what is not kosher. But if you want to understand the details in actuality, you need Torah Shebal Peh that really breaks it down into what is kosher and what is permitted, what is possible, what is not permitted. Shenivna binyan sholem. And here in Torah Shebal Peh is where the binyan sholem, a complete structure, is being built. In Torah Shebiksav, you can't build a complete structure as it is in reality, just like from a blueprint. It's a blueprint. Kivlat shenivna b'ramach evarim. He's comparing it to a child, not as a child is the one cell when it was conceived, or as a child is conceived by Hashem above, but a child that's already been shaped and formed, shenivna, was built in 248 limbs. In other words, not the beginning of pregnancy where you don't see any details. It's all concentrated in one cell, or even if it's 2 cells that split. When do you see it? In the later trimesters, as the child develops and the fetus develops, you see a full-blown child. You see a full-dimensional human being. So he's comparing that to Torah Shebal Peh, basically a full-grown fetus or child, Kivlad. And now he's referring back to earlier references in the difference between the written Torah and the oral Torah. He says, Ukavonim v'levenim, like stones and bricks, shemisadrim bebinyan, they organize in a structure, lias chadorim v'alias rabis, that the structure should have many rooms and floors. Alias is floors, many stories. But that's how he explains the difference between written Torah and the oral Torah. And now he comes back to answer the question that he asked at the beginning of the paragraph on the previous page. Why are Talmidei Chacham called Beinim? Why are they called builders when they're able to build the world with Torah Shebiksav? So he said, Shnei Emes. So he says now like this, Ulekach nikra Beinim. That's why the Talmidei Chacham, who are the developers and who are the students and the teachers of the oral Torah, are called builders. She'eskim b'binyan shelelam. So they're busy with building the world. Kikiyim kol ha'elam is b'chlal b'frat. Because the sustenance of all the worlds, in general and in detail, hu b'chachma de Torah dafke, is dafke with the wisdom of Torah. In other words, it's not just standing on its own. The wisdom of Torah is what sustains it. K'meshur kosav kulam b'chachma sisa kanal. And everything has been built, everything has been created with chachma, with wisdom of Torah. However, next page, 415. But the chachma of Torah Shebiksav alone, the wisdom of the written Torah, the higher wisdom. Zeu k'tzir haluach b'vat kanal. That's like the image on a blueprint or on a tablet. In the olden days, a blueprint was on a tablet, not on parchment, for example. And a luch b'vat. Aval hatanoim v'amaroim. But the Tanoim Amoraim of the Mishnah and the Gemara, these are the Talmidei Chacham he's referring to of Torah Shebal Peh, Nikroim Beinayach Hanal. They're called Al Tikra Beinayach Ale Beinayach. They're called the builders that we mentioned earlier. Shem Beinim Befrat, Bepnimius, Bemidas the Torah. They actually build in the details and Bepnimius, in the Midas of Torah, the Vav Midas that we talked about, where it's not just an intellectual concept of the architect, but it's now coming to an actualized, functional building. But Maisa, in the manner of how you perform, shall call mitzvah beprotius, every mitzvah in detail. In other words, the written Torah alone you would not be able to follow and live by, because it's still on a blueprint level, meaning brief. Not everything is spelled out. That's the equivalent here. So that's why they're called Beinei Elam. Now, remember here, we're not talking about the building, the actual creation of existence, because we know in the first 6 days of creation, Hashem created light, and then he created the heavens, and then he created vegetation, and then he created the luminaries, and then he created fish and birds and animals, and then ultimately the human being. All before there was Tanoim and Amoraim of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So there is a building element even before you have the scholars. He doesn't qualify that here. And that you can explain in a number of ways. First of all, you could say the Eibush himself was using Torah Sheba'al Peh in the process. Then later he depends on the people to do so. Or you could say that was the first time Almayla Lamata, the Eibush was putting everything in place and then saying to Adam and Chava, now it's your job to keep the world standing and keep building it and building it out, like we learned that to make sure that the garden blossoms and grows. In other words, the Eibush to put everything in place, but then it's our job is really to develop it. So when he says Bainim, just technically speaking, obviously the Eibush to build the world, not just as a blueprint. Because there was a physical world the first 6 days of creation. I'm just qualifying what he's saying here. But it's not a contradiction at all, because what he really wants to talk about is what happens afterwards. As we preserve that's when we learn Torah, we are Mekayim Alma. Actually, as a matter of fact, it actually says that in the Zohar. It says, Istakel baraisa bara alma. God looked into the Torah and created the world. Then it says, Kach barnash. So too human beings learn Torah. Lemdim Torah Mekayim Alma. They learn Torah and they preserve the world. So it's 2 stages in general. Even if the first stage technically is not in the muscle, you could say it's just an architectural design. It's like a computer program, but it's not yet functional. Obviously, the world was functional even from with the Eibishter's creation, but it's still 2 stages, and that's pretty clear here. Just to qualify that, I want to stop, and if anybody has any questions. But I just also don't want to miss anything. Let me just see. Let's read a few more lines and then I'll take some questions. They're also called builders. Builders of the world. The builders of the physical and the spiritual world. I guess he's saying 2 things, that they're buying the previous. Like before he said, there's the panemius part of existence, where they bring out all the details that in the written Torah are very concise and brief. But actually, 1 second. No, that's the panemius. I'm sorry. The panemius of the midas, meaning the inner dimension of the Torah. And now also that in every detail shebehen lefi shebchinas hachochma shebechol habruim hamahava esa ma'ayin liyesh. Because the level of wisdom that is in all of existence that creates them, ma'ayin liyesh. That actually actualizing that is the wisdom of the dibur, of speech, of the oral Torah, like in the 6 orders of the Mishnah, that speak about all the different components of Daimim, Tzemeach, Medaber in detail. I'm not sure the Gam, I have to go back and see exactly what he's adding. I think he's talking about 2 things. That Torah Sheba'al Peh gives us a deeper depth and an understanding of the written Torah, and also brings it down to details. That's what it sounds like to me, because he said earlier the same thing. Pnimius. Okay. Let me stop here if anybody wants to ask anything. And it's still not finished, as you see. There's more to say. But we'll stop here and then we'll go further. Okay. Any questions?
I have. I do, Rabbi. Two things. The stones, are they related to the luminous stones at all that he talked about, the Rebbe Rashab talked about before, or is that a totally different concept? And also, the Torah Sheba'al Peh already existed. It's just that Hashem created everything. So, or what do we do? The Tanaim there uncovering it, or I don't understand how they relate to one another a little bit.
Well, as far as the luminous stones go, earlier he said that the written Torah is like a naturally luminous stone, and the oral Torah is man-made. So in that sense, yeah, you could say that the written Torah is what he said, Bahir. Remember, he said before the word that it's a Chachma Brura, very clear and crystal clear, because it's the very holy letters that God is using to create. So I would say, so this is connected to the luminous part. Whether it's connected to the luminous part that he speaks about in Ayin Beis, as the three levels where he talks about the moon, the luminous stones, and the vision, that I don't want to comment on until I study that more. Not sure if it connects to that or not. Because there he compared it to Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud. I would say probably not, but I have to look that up. As far as your second question goes, it's a question you could ask about everything. God created the world, he created human beings, and yet he wants the human beings to be the ones that create a home for him in this world. So you could say, what is it? What he needs us to build a mishkan, a temple for him? But that's exactly the part. He wants a partner. So of course, in the beginning, God created it all. He created all the resources. He created the gold, silver, and copper. He created the human being. He commanded us to build a mishkan. But yes, our partnership is that we take all these resources he gave us, and it's our job to implement it. So it would be like a person saying, hey, you know what? Since God's doing it anyway, I don't have to do anything. That's not correct. So when the Tanoim and Amoraim coming, they are struggling and exerting themselves to learn Torah and understand what does God want, because God did not just give it on a golden platter, silver platter, whatever you want to call it. He gave us the basic principles in the written Torah. He gave us the methodologies. He even gave us the arguments back and forth. But he said, now you guys, meaning you human beings, struggle, argue back and forth. And look, the process of learning Torah is not easy. We're doing it right now. Many questions, many counter questions, many arguments, counter arguments, which is the essence of the whole oral Torah, where they discuss, can you eat this on Pesach? Can you not eat it on Pesach? Why don't we just turn to God and say, why don't you tell us? He said, I told you the principles, now you figure it out. Based on what I've given you, you can figure it out. So this is the whole purpose of creation, existence, that the humans should come and take the resources God provided and actualize them. That's why we're called builders of the world. Look what happens in this world. Even with God's Torah and God's guidelines, human beings have also destroyed this world. Holocausts, wars, genocides, violence, and God is not intervening because he says, I want you to build the world. And unfortunately, building the world also means you can choose to destroy the world. So our role is to take the Torah, understand it, appreciate it, learn it and study it, and then use this blueprint to build the best, most beautiful possible world, which ultimately will be realized in Mashiach's times, a world of peace, of no more famine, no more violence, no more war, and all the beautiful things that this world is capable of becoming.
Thank you. So it's like we're recreating it as we're doing it, sort of quote unquote recreating it.
I would say it's more than just recreating, we're improving it even. Because every time we develop a technology, we find new potential in the world that God implanted, but he didn't actualize.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, about Tanomen and the scholars, Talmud, Tamim Chachamim, we have to recognize who are now fit to this to this status. I heard you said Adam and Eve were put to the garden to look for and to water the garden. So maybe that purpose was delegating to Tanoim and Aharon right now. Who are they? What are they? The leaders of the religious world? Are they those who live
today? You mean today in the 21st century? You mean today?
Yeah. Where we can find the relevance of these in our days?
In general, I was trying to explain that there's God's role and then there's the human role. So in the beginning, it began with Adam and Eve. They began the process of developing, and of course, they also fell and made their mistakes. And their job was to develop the garden. Their children continued the process. For 26 generations, it was continued, and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. By Sinai, the Torah was formally given to the Jewish people.
Yes.
And so even though it was being fulfilled before by Adam and by the patriarchs and matriarchs, but it wasn't yet formal, by Matan Torah, by Sinai, it became formal. And ever since, the Torah continues to be developed, especially the oral Torah, as we've discussed and learned. And this continues till the end of time, because the Torah is a dynamic book and a dynamic force that we continue to study and learn. So Talmidei Chachamim means scholars through all the generations. Obviously, the great ones were the ones that lived during the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud, but today as well, when it says that the scholars, the Talmidei Chacham, are the builders, it's referring to Talmidei Chacham today as well. All those that study Torah and implement Torah in a way that makes this world a better place, you can call them builders of this world.
So if you said they're supposed to implement it, that means they're supposed to have some kind of leader position in our world to implement it, or it's just about learning and keeping it among your students?
It's a combination of both. Learning is one part, to know, but then it's called then taking what you've learned and implementing it. So there are those that are probably more involved in the learning part. Think of like professors in the yeshivas in the universities. And then there are those that take those teachings and go out there and actually make change in the world. So I think it's really a combination of both. It's like anytime you go to a rabbi, you go to a scholar, you ask him a question. First, he'll research to come up with an answer. Then comes step 2 is to implement that answer.
My question, how do you call those who are on the high position try to implement it? How do you have such leaders, or do we have among Jews who lead them in this position? We know Rabbi was one of them. Where are they now?
And any community leader that's doing his job is not just teaching and learning, he's also leading and guiding his community. So whether people are doing it right or not, that I'm not here to establish. But that there are definitely rabbis in the United States, in Israel, in Europe, all over the world that are leading communities, small or large. That's essentially what they're doing. They are trying to understand Torah and teach it to their community to improve the welfare and status of their communities that become more refined, more developed. So they're doing their job. Any rabbi or any teacher, man or woman for that matter, that is serving this role of taking Torah and looking into it and finding guidance and direction. Yeah, yesterday, Friday, there was an earthquake around here on the East Coast. There's going to be a solar eclipse tomorrow. Those that take that and gave a sermon on Shabbat about it, that helped inspire their people to be better human beings and so on are my opinion. That's what they're doing, what we're learning here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question about the reference of building Me'ayin Liyesh, that is saying it's the Chachmei Shabbat Torah Shabbal Peh. That seems like the notion of creation from Me'ayin Liyesh, from a seeming nothingness to something, is, I thought, a concept reserved only for God Himself, and the rest of the creation process, if you will, is like Ilu va'olo. So it's what? How can you understand? How can one understand the use of that language in connection with human beings? I mean, and great ones, Chazal, the greatest Torah scholars, were still human beings.
Well, it's a question on the Gemara that says that they're builders of the world. So the Mittler Rebbe is simply explaining, how could you call them builders of the world when God is the builder? And the answer is, when they follow Torah, the God's Torah, God is giving them the power to perpetuate this creation that He began, Yesh Ma'ayin. In other words, the Torah, like for example, it says, we learned earlier, that the whole world stands on the condition that the Jews would receive the Torah and learn the Torah. In other words, Torah keeps the world, sustains the world. How is that possible? Because it's not human beings are building. God is the creator. But the creator, through His Torah, gave us the ability, like I mentioned from the Zohar. Just as God looks into the Torah and creates it, we learn the Torah and we sustain it. So the sustaining of that Yesh Ma'ayin is number one. Number two, in general, we're talking about the power of Torah. We're not talking about the power of humans. It's the power of Torah that was given to humans to develop. And the part of Torah Shabbal Peh is that if you only go with Torah Shabiksav, you have more of a blueprint. The blueprint includes everything. But actualization, just like you can't do a mitzvah without Torah Shabbal Peh, in a way, creation can't really happen without Torah Shabbal Peh. I already explained earlier how did it happen the first time. So God Himself used Torah Shabbal Peh as well. But basically, Torah Shabbal Peh adds the element of implementation of creation.
Understood. Thank you.
So you could say we're quote unquote helping to sustain the world, like Eberster is always creating the world. We're helping to sustain it by learning Torah now and implementing Torah.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
But Rabbi Jacob said, well, how come we don't have people like Tanaim today? That's my question. I get all that. I get that they had this Ruach HaKodesh. They were literally like, in the same frequency as Hashem, and they did it. And I know they're great leaders today, as you said. But nobody's at that level. And the question is, why don't we have them in this generation, which actually seems like we need them the most?
It's a good question. It's not really relevant to our conversation here, but just briefly, I will say, it's like stages. Like asking why we weren't at Sinai. Why didn't we leave Egypt? Every generation has its role in the development and the evolution of making a dir b'tachtenim. And the Kabbalah talks about that the generations in history are structured like a human body, with Adam HaRishon being like the head of the body, and we are called Ikvas de Mashiach, the heels of Mashiach, because we're like the heels of the body. So the whole of history, you could say, moves from the head downward. And the birur, once you've finished the work that the head had to do, the next step is the lower parts and the lower parts. The Tanoim Amoraim are somewhere midish shebechachma. Moshe Rabbeinu, and prior to Moshe, is more like Chabad. So we are Nihi, Malchus, all the way down to Malchus. So every generation is doing its job, because remember, if you want to get the full job done, you have to allocate the work to all areas of Hishtalshalos. So who's going to deal with the so-called final steps? That's us. It's actually the hardest ones, but we also have all the cumulative energy of previous generations. So this is a long discussion that deserves its own class about how each generation did its role. The Tanoim Amoraim did their job. So you could ask the same question. The Tanoim were higher than the Amoraim. So why there no Tanoim in the time of Amoraim? and the Amoraim are higher than the Rabbanon Savaroi, and higher than the Go'enim, and then the Rishonim, and then the Achrenim. So in every generation, you could always ask, why don't they have the next earlier generation? Because that's not the job. The job is like a marathon, with each generation doing its role and and covering the segment that it needs to do in its berurim. When we say the berurim are finished, we're saying all the higher levels have been done, and now we're finishing the last touches, and we're ready to bring Mashiach. So basically, every generation has its role.
Thank you.
Okay.
When the Rebbe says the Torah Shebeksav, I would assume that he's referring just to the 5 books of Moses and not to Navi and Ksuvim, which is, I mean, Shmuel, all these Sforim, Yoshua, Malachim have different authors of Nevi'im that authored it, according to Torah. I was just wondering, when he says Torah Shebeksav throughout this whole discussion, is he's I assume he's just specifically relating to the 5 books of Moses and not all of Tanakh. Is that correct?
I think not. I think he's referring to all the Chav Dalet Sifrei Kodesh, the 24 written Torah, books of written Torah. It may not
I
be
think you're right,
relevant.
Reb Shimon. Chav Dalet Sifrei Kodesh. That's what I think also.
Yeah. It
Well,
may not be relevant to our conversation here, because what difference does it make? Why like, what practical, what?
Well, we don't learn the mitzvahs, for example. The Taryag mitzvahs are delineated in the Chumash, not in Navi and Ksuvim, although discussed there.
One second, with respect, if you look in Gemara, Tanakh is quoted extensively, not just Chumash.
I'm not saying it's not the source of it.
No, it's
obviously.
quoted in regard to mitzvahs. So, yeah,
What?
some of the, it's true that in the Chamisha Chumshei Torah they're all spelled out, but there are many details that are learned from different verses in Nach.
Okay, that's fine, but the source of it, but Nach seems to be more of a, I don't know, it's a human
It's not a
history.
question of seams. The fact is, the Chav Dalet Sifrei Kodesh are called Torah Shebeksav.
I
When you say
understand
written
that.
Torah, it means all 24. That's his definition.
But there is a
Here
distinction between.
He's not going into the detailed difference between the 5 Chamisha Chumshei Torah and the rest. But actually, interestingly, if you go to the original Maimer from the Alter Rebbe, there he clearly says Torah Shebeksav is the 24 books. So if you really want to be precise, if you look in the Maimer in Torah, let me just bring it here. 1 second. Yeah. So Tamale Kad, if you may recall. Yeah, page let me see inside.
But Tamale Kado.
Yeah, Tamale Kado, right. He brings
Chav
this
Dalet
on
Sifrei Kodesh. I think for Friedrich Rebbe will learn that.
yeah, but in the
Tzadik
Maimer, the
Dalet.
very Maimer that this Maimer from the Mittler Rebbe is based on, the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe. Let me right here. He brings it the Timoli Kada Vital, Chav Dalet Sifrin Daraisa. Yeah. On page 38D, it says clearly, he's talking here about the written Torah. He brings it again later, I believe. Yeah. Now, is there a general difference between the 5 books and the others? There is. Just like there's difference between Sefer Bereishis and the other 4 Svarim. But Torah Shebeksav generally means all 24. And Torah Sheba'peh begins with Seder Zroim, with Masechta Berachis in the Mishnah and Talmud and Gemara. I think even in Ayin Beis he also discusses this a bit. If I recall correctly, when he speaks about Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud, I think he speaks about it as well, the Chav Dalet, if I recall correctly. Yeah. Okay. Let's read the next parentheses.
Can I follow up on that, or and I have
Yeah.
one question.
Go ahead. Sure. Go ahead.
So when we talk about the Torah before lifnei at Tzimtzum having total only light and no Helam, so the whole discussion when in Nanach especially, or all Chumash, the whole thing, when they have discussions of sins, of errors, worse things happening, avodah zarah, all this, even if that's included in the Torah before the Tzimtzum, even though it's that has concealment within it, meaning that even the mere fact of just mentioning avodah zarah in Torah before the Tzimtzum, because it's all written there, and you just said all 24 books are present in that before the Tzimtzum, and they discuss what happened to Gideon and all the all the horrible affairs that happened throughout the years, and that would seem that would be how it's hard to understand how that is pure light, pure godliness, pure goodness before the Tzimtzum, if it's already present in there, concealments of errors and primarily of errors. How would you reconcile that? It seems to be even if it's in Makshava, level of Makshava, or even higher than Makshava, but still the presence of that concept, of those concepts.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
It's a very famous question that's brought in Zohar, and Chassidus explains it. We discussed it last week in one of the classes. I put it in more even more explicit terms. The Zohar asked the question like this: since Torah precedes existence, and the whole world was created by the blueprint of Torah, which in different words is like Torah before the Tzimtzum. So how do you explain the story of Chet Eitzadas? That means that the Torah is already predicting there will be a sin and there'll be death, because it says only because of Chet Eitzadas was there death. And the pasuk says Adam Kiyam is Bo'el. We have entire psukim that talk about the laws of Tumah V'Tara, of Tumas Mes. So the Torah is basically already establishing and taking away free will. It's predestined that there will be death, which means there'll be sin, and that Adam Chava would have to eat from the tree of knowledge, which, different terms, is similar to the question you're asking, but even in a broader sense. And the Zohar answers a very cryptic answer, and there's a mimer from the Tzemach Tzedek in Eratera Chukas, and then a mimer from the Rebbe Rashab in Tofreish Ayin Tes, Zois Chukas HaTorah. These are the parshas that talk about Parsha Porah, that talk about Tumas Mes. And I actually wrote it up in English. It's online on my website, our website, meaningfullife.com, where he gives 3 different answers to this question, and really answers as well the question you're asking. Basically, I'll just briefly say this. The answer is that had the Torah, the way the Torah is writing about Chet Eitzadas and about Misa, could have played itself out in many ways. Misa doesn't always have to be a negative thing. Misa, there's an expression, Kol man the nofel medarga ikra mis. When we say Sheva Yipul Tzadik V'Kom, every aliyah from one level to the next is considered the death of the lower level to get to the higher level. It's only due to the actual sin of Eitzadas that caused death to be painful and filled with grief and loss. But the very concept of death, had they not eaten from the tree of knowledge, would have meant a very different thing. It would have meant the death of one spiritual level to get to another level. Basically, the suspension of one level before you get to the next level. And the same thing with all these concepts in Torah that you're talking about. Wherever you see a negative, you see Esav, Amalek, everything, even Haman for that matter. And all these things that are negative, had the way they are in Torah before the Tzimtzum, or you can say the Torah before creation of existence, they're all in Ruchnius. And in Ruchnius, they can be very high spiritual levels, like we say Lavan. So Kabbalah explains that Lavan in highest levels is Loivan Elyon, the highest levels of Keser. Achashverosh is Is the Melech Sha'achris Bereishis Shalei, is talking about Hashem. So in the Ruchnius of Torah and the highest levels, basically the Torah is completely different to reality. It's when it's nishtalshal and comes down into Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Nasiya. And then especially once humans get involved and they bring their choices and actions, that's when it could become nishtalshal into something very negative. But it all originates in very high spiritual levels, everything. So the Torah, if you were able to read the Torah in Atzilus or the Torah Lifnei Tzimtzum, all you'd see is deep spiritual levels. Even Helam is God's Tzimtzum. There's nothing wrong. God has the power to reveal. He has the power to conceal. There's nothing negative about it. The negative comes when we misunderstand the concealment and then act on it in the wrong way with our free will. That's briefly. It's a lot more elaborate discussion on the matter. And the other, as I said, there are 3 answers, but that's the gist of it. Okay. As I said, I wrote it up in English in detail, so you could find it probably online. If you can't find it, let me know. I'll be happy to refer you to it.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Can you send us the link? It's a brilliant piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Yitzhak, if you're there, if you could find it on our site, please post it. If not, I'll look around.
That's very interesting about
What
that.
would it be? What would be the key words? What would you have called it?
Maybe death, Torah, death, or just look at ayin test. Maybe the year 5679. That would be the year that the Rebbe Rashab is Maimer. Maybe look up 5679. That may be a unique word.
Okay.
Tafresh ayin 79. Yeah, Tafresh ayin test. Right.
So what you're saying, if I may follow, because it is brilliant, I think, just realization for me. Haman, for example, could seen. I know about Lavan and Esav, the higher levels, even Paro, right? Or Niferosa de Kala Oros. What's the term that's the highest level of Paro? But what about Haman, for example? How could we see a Haman or actual Averas?
There is. Chassidus talks about the source of all these levels. Haman, Parai, Haman, Parai, they're all Parai, one of the highest levels. Yes, they all have in their root very high spiritual levels.
Okay. Very good.
Is that why we have to get drunk so we don't know the difference? Because that's really where it's at.
That's another discussion.
All right, sorry.
And the final question I have, and thank you, was that when we're talking about bone, when we say in davening, that all the chachamim that al tikrei banayich ela banayich, that the Talmidei Chachamim builders of the world, and what the Rebbe is talking about here in the Maimon, through their learning Torah, the Mishnah, and so on. What about, is there a distinction being made here between near mitzvah Torah, or that it seems like Talmidei Chachamim, yes, they're building the world and they're makayim the olam, as you quoted the Zohar earlier, through their Torah learning. But is the Rebbe going to make a distinction between that aspect of being a builder in that manner of Talmidei Chachamim in the base medrash versus the actual builders of mitzvahs that go out into the world and build shuls and build hospitals and build hatzalas and create.
I don't know if he's going to say it exactly that way, but I believe that once we finish with Torah Shabbat Peh, he's going to then say that mitzvahs is the implementation of Torah Shabbat Peh. Because remember, Torah Shabbat Peh is still in the book at the end of the day.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that he's going to go in that direction, that mitzvahs are essentially the execution of the Torah Shabbat Peh builders, which in turn is the execution of the blueprint of Torah Shabbat.
That's what I was referring to.
Yeah. I'm sure he's going to get there.
Okay.
I'm going to stop here because I have to run. I'm going to stop here by the parentheses. Any other question? If not, If you have a question, if you don't mind, I'll take it tomorrow. I need to run right now. So I'll stop here, top of page 415. And okay, plenty of food for thought.
Great class, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Let me stop here, top of 415.
Thank you very much.